Wildfire by Rose Mackey, Book 3 in the Under Violet Sun series. The story so far. In the distant future, Earth has exploded into the galaxy and colonized dozens of planets. During the colonization process, humans realized it was easier to genetically engineer the humans to fit a new planet than terraform an entire planet to their needs. This resulted in a diaspora of human template species that worked together as part of an alliance, pooling their shared economic, social, and military power against alien species. Falosia and Verit are two colonized human planets, each with different matriarchal societies. Falosians are empaths, and the planet has a majority female population. Their few males are cosseted, petted, and adored, but are not viewed as suitable long-term partners. Many of the Falosians have become dissatisfied with this situation and seek longer-term mates of their own, craving the closeness of a pair bond. Verit is a predominantly male martial society, ruled over by a matriarch and her council of Maman. In centuries past, Verit was at war, and the matriarchs of the time decided to engineer the males of their species into feline hybrids. It worked better than anyone could have expected, but had many unforeseen consequences for the males, leaving them with berserker rage. Verit is organized into clans, and are among the most feared warriors in the galaxy. The Maman rule the clans with an iron fist, bearing centuries of guilt and responsibility for their part in the engineering of their males, while the males revere their females, but resent them for their iron control. The Verit birth rate is declining, and unless something can be done, their species will disappear within a few generations. It is believed by Verit that another planet, Svoboda, is the cause of their infertility. Svoboda is male-dominated and has an open policy of resistance against matriarchal cultures. Falosia and Verit have come together to co-sponsor a new colony, hoping that finding mates between them may help solve both their issues. A small establishment group from both planets, under the command of Cadet Morale, has landed to start the colony building phase. It has worked better than either group could have hoped. Despite some initial social friction, the Falosians and Verit colonists blend well, and there have been 2 successful matings already in the first few months. However, the colony has been plagued by problems from the start. There have been multiple instances of sabotage, both on and off planet, disrupting their supply chains and placing the lives of everyone on the planet in jeopardy. A saboteur was caught and interrogated and pointed to Svoboda as the cause. The colony has also suffered repeated failures of communications and scanning equipment due to localized interference. It was discovered that a rare mineral, Zelan, exists on the planet and is the cause of the interference. Zelan is highly valuable. It has never been found in such large quantities before, and when word gets out that Zelan is present, it will change the power structure of the Alliance and the galaxy. The fledgling colony is entirely unprepared for the onslaught of thieves and pirates that will descend on their little backwater planet. In investigating the Zelan, the colonists also discovered the presence of an ancient sentient alien ship, Castie. The only thing more prized than Zelan in the galaxy is ancient alien tech. They have had to go to great lengths to keep this under wraps, including keeping an Alliance envoy as their guest to prevent him from reporting the situation. They have resolved to keep everything secret while they gather evidence against Svoboda for the crimes against the colony. But the urgency is rising and they cannot keep the envoy forever. Prologue. The market. A creature shrieked, a long, undulating, wailing cry that raised the hairs on Lenora's arms. She raced through the market, dodging people and stalls, blades up. When she reached the corner where the shop was, she skidded to a stop, her mouth gaped in shock. Vordan stumbled back out of a doorway, crashing into a market stall. The stallholder puffed up its feathers and squawked at him in anger, shoving him off. He landed on his ass on the tiled walkway in the piazza, covered head to toe in green goop. Out of the doorway emerged a giant insectoid. Its legs emerged first, green chitin shimmering with red highlights as they unfolded. Its upper body reared back, revealing a dark red maw rimmed in sharp chitinous ridges, dripping more of the green goo. "Need help, flyboy?" she called as she started wading through the tide of shoppers frantically trying to get out of the fight zone. He laughed. The idiot laughed. "No, your ladyship, I'll be right there." He flipped backwards into a crouch and trained a gun on the creature. She blinked. Where in the name of the goddess did he pull that from? He shot the creature's right foreleg and it wailed again. Lenora clenched her teeth against the pain as the sound crescendoed, vibrating through her bones and making her teeth rattle. The remaining patrons in the market scattered. Vordan snarled at it. "Now tell me where he is." It hissed at him, shooting another gob of goo at his feet and swiping with a ridged foreleg. He ducked and shot the offending limb. "I'm afraid I don't have all day. I'm on a schedule. The only question is whether you run out of legs before I get my answers." 5 days earlier. Chapter 1. Everything in its place. Lenora walked along the aisle of Storage Unit 5, scanner in hand, surveying her domain. The shelves of the storage unit were stacked high with grey transport containers, their labels facing front, aligned with military precision. Overlaid in her vision was her logistics view, detailing the contents of each box, its transport history, materials, safety warnings, and more. With a flick of her eyelid, she dismissed the data, fed from the HUD control cuff on her ear. Everything was perfectly in its place, organised and calm, just like she liked it. She accessed her audio channel on her HUD, intending to call her team when it beeped, and she realised she was receiving an incoming call. Blinking to accept, the cadet's face floated into view. Lenora took a breath. An unexpected call from the colony governor was never a good thing. "Good morning, cadet." In her usual clipped, efficient manner, the cadet responded. "Good morning, cadet. My apologies for interrupting you. Please make yourself available to attend a meeting at my office this morning at 1000. "Of course, ma'am. May I ask what it is regarding?" The cadet's eyes were bleak. "I have a mission assignment for you." Lenora stilled and her heart dropped. She chose her words carefully. "A mission, ma'am." The cadet's visage softened a fraction. "Yes, Lenora, I'm sorry. You know that I had hoped we would not." She trailed off, her voice firming. "Just come in for the briefing. We'll talk more then." "Yes, ma'am." There was no other acceptable response. The cadet nodded brusquely and signed off. Lenora lifted a shaking hand to lean on the nearest shelving unit, panic turning her legs to noodles. She turned to examine her neat storage units again. The cleanliness and order were revealed for the lie they were. What had she been thinking? That she could escape her past, that she could come to a new planet and fill her life with the calm serenity she so desperately needed. Wherever she went, her choices followed her, snapping at her heels like demons out of ancient mythology. She stiffened, shoring up her internal defences, shoving away her incipient panic and fear. Bolting closed the door to her emotions by sheer force of will. She was a senior officer of the Falosian military. It was the single good choice she had made in her life. She had devoted her life to the service of her mother's planet, and if they required her to undertake a mission, she would, whatever the personal cost. She smoothed her jumpsuit uniform. There was still work to do before her briefing. Lenora placed the call to her second-in-command. The young Falosian officer's face floated in front of her, her yellow eyes bright with energy. "Morning, boss. How's the stock take going?" Lenora laughed, feeling her spirits lift. Yuli had an innate gift for making those about her feel better, just by her presence. "I've completed Unit 5. Please let the team know they did an excellent job. Everything is present and correct." Yuli bobbed her head in acknowledgement. "Great. That means we can start on Unit 6. I'll let Medbay know we are coming to them later on today to do Medbay stores. Actually, if you could delay that. The KDEC has asked me to attend a meeting this morning at 1000, and there may be an assignment for us. I'll let you know after." Yuli bobbed her head again, blissfully unaware of the churning anxiety within Lenora. "Yes, ma'am." They exchanged a few more operational details and pleasantries before signing off. Lenora took a last look around the storage unit before stepping out of the airlock onto the waiting gantry and sealing it behind her. She crossed the open grassed courtyard that was the centre of their small base, heading for the administration building. With each step, she couldn't help the sensation that she was walking further and further away from the small, happy slice of peace she had carved out for herself, that she was voluntarily putting her head back in the noose. She sighed. She had survived before and she would again. It wasn't like it was the first time. Vordan smiled professionally at the ground staff as they finished loading up the last of the equipment in the flyer hold. He repressed a sigh, thankful that this was his last trip to the agricultural station. He had spent all week doing little bunny-hop flights to deliver necessary equipment. It was essential, meaningful work, building the future of the new colony. He was contributing to the survival of his society, and he should be proud to be playing his part. Instead, he was mercilessly bored. When the matriarch had assigned him here, after years of flying for Verit in contract mercenary engagements, he had welcomed the adventure. Not that she had sought his opinion on the matter. The thought of establishing a new colony, of finding a mate of his own, had sparked images of wild adventures, of wrestling an unknown wilderness into submission. He'd done more combat flying in the past 10 years than most did in their whole life. This should have been like an extended vacation. Instead, he was stuck ferrying agricultural cargo back and forth as part of a carefully laid out colony establishment plan that would ensure the safety, security, and success of the new venture. It was sensible and boring. What was worse was that once this phase was completed, he'd then be reassigned to ferrying building materials for the new homes. The plan would be to rinse and repeat for the next 50 years or so, as new colonists moved to the newly named Dalat colony and the colony expanded. He sighed again and hopped into the cockpit of the shuttle. It was a solid craft, bulk produced all across the Alliance, perfectly suited for colonial life. They could run for years with minimal maintenance, used commonly available parts, and were stable enough to carry livestock, a far cry from the sleek scout vessels he was used to. He began the pre-flight checks, seeing the sea of green indicators appear in his flight HUD. When there was a gentle ping indicating an incoming call, he blinked in surprise when he realized who it was from. "Cadet, is there a problem? Is everything all right?" She laughed huskily. "Yes, pilot, all is well. I need you to attend a 1000 briefing. Are you available?" Vordan quickly checked the time on the HUD view. "Yes, ma'am. I have one scheduled flight this morning to Ag Station 1. I can be back before then." "Thank you, Vordan." He signed off, completing the pre-flight checks on automatic as his mind raced, considering the possibilities. He had rarely interacted with the K-Deck. As the commander of the base, she had many responsibilities, few of which intersected with flight planning. As he took off, he commed Lucius, first warrior of the Dathalka clan, and the leader of the Verit warriors on the colony, as their prime was off-world with his mate, who was recovering from a long illness. "Go ahead, warrior," came the warm, gruff reply, against a background of repetitive thudding. He must be out at the building sites where they were laying the foundations for the utilities complex. "Luke, I've been asked to attend a meeting with the cadet this morning. Did you know? Do you know what it's about?" Yes and yes. The thudding ceased, followed by curses and shouts, and then more thudding. "Care to share?" "Nope." Vordan considered. Luke was generally open with the males. It was unlike him to be so tight-lipped. "Is there anything I should prep for the meeting? Will you be there?" Luke hesitated, and Vordan heard a rustle, and the background noise lowered. "Vordan, it's about an off-world mission. That's all I can say for now. Just be there, warrior. You'll be fully briefed." Vordan considered. "Acknowledged, sir. Thank you." The rest of the morning passed excruciatingly slowly as Vordan completed his run. Eventually, he found himself sitting in the cadet's office, resisting the urge to fidget in anticipation. The others filed in, and he nodded politely as they took their seats at the table. The cadet was already seated at the head, as expected. He made a couple of half-hearted attempts at conversation until Lucius de, first warrior of Dathalka, and Lenora Pasal, the colony chief healer and Luke's mate, arrived together. Both smiled at him in welcome. He grinned back, delighted to see them. They had been among the first of the Verit Falosian matings, and every time he saw them, it gave him hope for his brothers and himself. If a smart, beautiful female like Lenora would accept a stubborn, overbearing male like the first warrior, there was hope for them all. Next came Gadek Lenora Patra, their head of logistics, and Gadek Sraya Ratan, their head of defence. The females nodded politely at him, taking seats at the far end of the long table, deep in discussion over a tablet. The recently promoted Gadek Zira Garrick entered. His interest was piqued together. This group comprised most of the colony's ruling committee. The only people missing were the heads of administration and engineering, and the Maman, the female leader of the Verit colonists. The Maman was still recuperating after receiving an experimental alien medical treatment for a persistent degenerative condition. "Thank you for waiting for me," came a clear voice, and Vordan whipped his head around to see Skara, a newly minted Maman. Just recently come of age, She had undergone her maman birthright ceremony just 2 weeks past. The Verit males inclined their heads in a small bob at her, the females smiling at her warmly. Vordan was surprised to see her here. Junior maman often underwent years of mentoring before they were allowed to take on leadership positions. Still, he reflected, the entire colony was an experiment. Many things that were once taken for granted were turned upside down. He eyed her, considering. He did not know the young maman well. He had only recently transferred to the Dathalka clan after one of their own pilots had retired. While he had seen her at meals, they had not spoken a word. He sincerely hoped that she had a good head on her shoulders and that he would not be ordered into folly by her inexperience. The cadet nodded in welcome to Skara, clearly expecting her. "Thank you all for joining me on such short notice. I apologize for the urgency, however we are on a tight timeline. This briefing is confidential. Highest security clearance." Vordan started. He did not have the clearance for this. He glanced at Luke inquiringly, who shook his head and nodded at him to pay attention to the cadet. Excitement stirred. Whatever this was, it was big. "I am streaming to your HUD's mission briefing files and historic briefing packets. You may review them after we finish here to supplement this verbal briefing. You are here because the leaders of our worlds have made a decision. As you know, we have been subject to repeated sabotage attempts and incursions since we arrived on this planet. 2 weeks ago, representatives of the Matriarch and the Lakar met to discuss the new intelligence we have received, which indicates that the sabotage is the work of Svoboda." Vordan snarled at the name of Verit's hated enemy, but he noted that no one else reacted. Clearly he was the only one not already privy to this information. "Our leaders have agreed to confront the Alliance with this. It is a clear breach of the Alliance Code, and if we provide evidence, they must take action. We need solid evidence to take this to the Council. There are 3 goals. First, we need to know if this results from a splinter faction within Svoboda or an action of the government. Second, we must know if this is part of a greater plan and what the end goal is. Finally, we must know if they know that we have Zealan and ancient tech on this planet." Vordan's mind reeled, putting together the pieces of the last few months, the snippets of information he had come across, of hushed conversations. He had known there was something going on with the Alliance, but this was huge. This could mean war. It had been their biggest fear from the first moment the Zealan was discovered, that someone would try to take it from them. Zealan was highly valuable, used in everything from medical technology to stealth tech. When, not if, word got out that the planet had Zealan, every mercenary pirate and petty princeling would descend on them. Their fledgling colony was not yet in a position to defend itself from an all-out assault. Their only hope was to delay the announcement as long as possible to allow them to fortify the planet against the inevitable. "This is the mission. You will be split into 2 teams covering distinct lines of investigation. Sedai Alliance Ambassador Amira has been working with the Falosian Special Forces, the Dagger Kiss, to trace where the saboteurs have been intercepting our supply flights these past months and has had a breakthrough. Amira will set up a decoy supply run. Odrande and Zira will take Castie and use its camouflage technology to mount an ambush, take prisoners, and trace them back to the source." Vordan grinned ferally, excitement bubbling up. Castie was an ancient, sentient alien ship they had recently discovered. It had bonded with Zira and had incredible capabilities that they had barely begun to understand. The scientists had actually come to blows over who got to study it first. He was disappointed that he wouldn't get the chance to travel on Castie, but the opportunity to actually use Castie in a real-life situation was beyond exciting. The cadet continued. "On the way, you will drop Denara and Lucius off at Haven. Denara has been invited to speak on her most recent genetic therapies at a medical conference there. There are several prominent Svobodan officials going. She will see if she can pick anything up with her empathic senses. The last team will be Lenora, Skara, and Vordan. We know from the Malurian mercenaries that attacked Zira at the crater site last month that someone has placed several contracts for us on the grey market. Lenora will pose as a mercenary, take one of the jobs, and find out who is placing hits on us." Vordan was stunned. He looked at Lenora, the logistics officer. She was so still, so self-contained. He couldn't imagine her posing as a mercenary. Her hair was jet black, scraped back into a tight bun, her skin pale as the moon. The only thing that gave away that she was Falosian was the classic yellow eyes. shining a warm, sunny yellow, so at odds with her overall distant demeanour. She was a regal ice queen. Lenora looked back at him coldly, her glare daring him to say anything. "Excuse me, ma'am." Vordan raised a hand to speak. The cadet nodded in permission. "What will be my function on the team?" The cadet raised an eyebrow at him, her lips quirking in amusement. "Vordan, you will pilot Lenora's ship wherever she needs to go. Lucius tells me you have extensive flight combat experience." He flushed. "Yes, ma'am," he responded. "I have thousands of hours of combat experience. That's settled then. Thank you for the opportunity, ma'am. I will pilot the G-deck wherever she wants to go and protect her with my life." The corners of the K-deck's mouth lifted again in the ghost of a smile that vanished before he could be sure that it had been there. "Thank you, Vordan. I'm sure Lenora will appreciate that." Vordan risked a glance at Lenora, but she may as well have been carved from stone. He got so little response. The K-deck moved to continue, but Vordan cut her off. "However, I have some concerns about this mission." "Yes, Vordan." The K-deck was the image of patience, but Vordan could see Luke shaking his head at him from the corner of his eye. Realizing that he was pushing his luck, he smiled charmingly. It bounced off the K-deck like peanuts off a wall. "You may not be aware, but my previous clan, Tothus, is part of Verit's mercenary forces. We were an army for hire. I know how mercenary markets work, and they will never hire an unknown merc group of just 3 people. He saw Luke put his face into his hands. The silence drew out, and he realized that, charming smile or not, he may have crossed a line. "Thank you for that insight, pilot. I am aware of your history. It is the reason we selected you. It will not be just the 3 of you. You will collect other personnel on the way. The details are in your briefing packet. As for Lenora being unknown, that won't be a problem." The cadet looked at Lenora, who held her gaze for a long moment before nodding permission. Before Lenora returned to her mother and joined the Falosian military, she lived and worked with her father's family. They are well known in this field. Vordan looked at Lenora with open curiosity as the cadet finished. "You will meet up with the Unor sect." Vordan's jaw dropped. "The Unor? Your father is Unor?" Lenora spoke for the first time in the briefing, her voice low and husky. It surprised him. The voice belonged to a jazz singer. It was lush and dark, completely at odds with the military female before him. "My father is Dutak Unor." The name fell into the silence. "Dutak Unor," he repeated incredulously. Lenora nodded, and he examined her again carefully before it clicked in his brain, and he was floored. "You are Lenoriel Unor." Lenora nodded again, her skin ashen, her lips pinched tight. "I am." He couldn't have been more surprised if she had declared herself Empress of Old Earth. The same Lenoriel Unor that did the Intgalone raid 10 years ago. That took on 12 Vranken-class ships to run the trading blockade at Destiny. The Black Valkyrie. Lenoriel was a legend, widely thought dead nearly a decade past. "Yes." Her yellow eyes spit fire at him, daring him to speak further. "You can exchange history later, Vordan. If I might continue." The cadet spoke into the silence, and he flushed, remembering their audience. He mumbled a polite, "Yes, ma'am. You have 2 months to undertake your missions." This time the question came from Lenora. "What's the rush? An infiltration like this takes time and planning. I may have a reputation," she said, glancing at Vordan, "but I've been out of it for years. There will be a lot of attention if I re-emerge without fanfare. The 6-month colony establishment inspection is in 3 months. We must decide whether to declare that we have discovered the Zealand and the tech, or make other arrangements. If the Alliance is not implicated in the sabotage, or they take action against Svoboda, or if it is a small splinter group, we may choose to declare and trust in the strength and unity of the Alliance to work through this. If not, we may be faced with the choice of going against the Alliance." "Secession." Lenora's voice was tight. "The possibility has been discussed." The cadet was non-committal. "But we will not take such a drastic step lightly, unless we have obvious proof that the Alliance cannot be trusted." "Why not just go to them now with our suspicions? They have their own investigators. Surely they could help us." This came from Denara. "Because the mercenaries that attacked the crater came on the same ship as the last Alliance envoy. Until we know how involved they are, we can't trust them not to work against us." Vordan nodded in understanding. The cadet returned her gaze to Lenora. "As for attention at your re-emergence, we're counting on it. A random merc could never hope to meet the leaders behind this, but your history gives you a certain cachet. We hope it will be enough to tip the balance in your favor and get you an opportunity to work your way up. We don't have time for a patient infiltration. This needs to be done in a single big splash." Lenora pondered, tapping her fingers lightly on the table in front of her in an offbeat rhythm. "That's a big if. We will have to offer Dutak something for his cooperation if we want his people to pose as my team. What do you have in mind?" "We will provide you with a 5-microgram canister of Xelan. He doesn't need to know that it was mined here." Vordan whistled low. 5 micrograms of Xelan was enough to buy a decent-sized island, complete with mansion and servants on a nice planet. "Gadexraya will stay here with me and run colonial security. The other reason for our rush is our little Alliance envoy problem." The cadet looked at Vordan. "The envoy has been our guest since the inspection 2 weeks ago." He gaped, stunned again at the scale of the situation. "You took an Alliance envoy prisoner. Kidnapping is frowned on in most civilized worlds, you know." The cadet smiled tightly at him. "He is our guest," she repeated with a snap. "We cannot keep him here forever. Aside from us not having long-term guest facilities, he is a Malurian royal. It's only a matter of time before someone comes looking for him." Lenora finally smiled. It was faint, but it was there. It contained a ghost of humor. "We just keep stacking up the problems, don't we? He has been accommodating so far, but it's clear he knows we are up to something. He is not happy that his Alliance Mercy mission to deliver us supplies was used as a cover to land a paramilitary force, and he feels some level of responsibility for that, and is being cooperative for now. However, this goodwill will only last so long." Luke chimed in. "Malurian are deadly, especially their royals. They are faster, stronger, more intelligent. I'm not sure we could contain him if he made a determined effort to escape. He could disappear into the bush and simply wait for the rescue to come. It's unlikely that we'd ever find him. It's a big planet." "Why not just let him go?" asked Vordan. "Because in every problem there is also opportunity. Should things go wrong with the Alliance, let's say that the Malurian Empire may provide a contingency plan." The cadet stood. "Take tonight to read your briefings. You leave tomorrow. Zira will drop you at each of your destinations in Castie." Chapter 2. Journey. Castie was unlike anything Lenora had ever seen. Matte black, somewhere between rock and metal, with ridged striations covering its rear. It was a long cylinder floating in the air above the colony, completely camouflaged from sight and sound. You only saw it if it wanted you to. Vordan was piloting them up to Castie in a small flitter shuttle, designed to carry just a few passengers. The briefing packet had noted that the ship was run by a sentient AI, and the ship was morphic. It adapted and conformed to its pilot's will. "Welcome, Lenora, to High Zeran." A soft voice spoke directly into her HUD feed, and she looked at Zira inquiringly. Castie is the name of the type of vessel. The Ulariv, the ancient aliens, named their ships after their operators. This one is High Zeran, named for Odran and I. Zira reached over and stroked back the long silver hair of her mate Odran sitting next to her. They were the second Falosian Verit pairing, and they were visibly besotted with each other. He squeezed her knee, looking at her with such open adoration that Lenora had to look away. That single look revealed the naked truth of their soul bond. She couldn't bear to look at their joy. She loved Zira. The female was one of her closest friends, and she didn't begrudge her happiness, but jealousy bit deep. Needing a distraction, she replied to the ship. "Thank you, ship. How should I address you?" She was astonished to sense the ship's amusement. She knew it was sentient. However, this was an actual emotion that registered on her empathic senses. "However you like. Zira calls me Castie. If you prefer, you may do so as well. Castie means home, wherever you are. My purpose is to look after Zira and hers, to provide for anything and everything they might need." "Thank you, Castie." Lenora looked at Vordan in the pilot's seat. They had not spoken a word this morning, had not spoken at all after his incredulous outburst at the briefing yesterday. She had been furious. She had never wanted to see that blend of admiration, fear and excitement in a male's eyes again. But she supposed she would have to get used to it again. Despite her best efforts, Lenoriel's legend had continued to grow. She steeled herself. She'd put up with it for the sake of the mission, even if it made her feel sick, made her itch to grab her knife and drive it into the eyes of the arrogant male who looked at her so boldly. Lenoriel had always attracted male attention. They had always desired to possess her, control her, wanted to be the one to bring the notorious, vibrant smuggler to heel. She smiled grimly. More often than not, they had turned ugly when they realized she would never allow herself to be owned in any way. Lenora had no such issues. Lenora was calm and contained. Her very ordinariness protected her, and in doing so, gave her a freedom that Lenoriel had never known. She had spent long nights reflecting on the irony that she had more freedom working in logistics in the military than she had ever had as the head of an intergalactic cartel. The open shuttle bay loomed before them as Vordan expertly navigated the shuttle into place. As they gathered their gear, Zira announced that Castie had prepared a light meal for them, where they could discuss their mission in more detail. Lenora followed Zira out of the shuttle and into the ship proper, stopping in her tracks when the utilitarian black and grey of the shuttle bay abruptly transformed into smooth wooden floors and high curved ceilings. As they walked, the walls were punctuated with large picture windows, open to an unmistakably Falosian view, black sand beaches and a dark blue and pink ocean. At one opening, the light green curtains billowed, and she realized it was doors open to a balcony. Stepping up to them, she scented the salt sea air and a hint of seaweed. "It's so real. How is this possible?" she murmured. "It's Castie," came Zira's reply from behind her. She turned to look at Zira and noted that her gaze was trained on the horizon. "It's my grandmother's house on Falosia, in the Hakada province. I spent my summers there with my sisters when I was young. It is the place that holds the fondest memories for me, the place I think of as home. Castie recreated it." Lenora felt a pang of envy. "I didn't live on Falosia until I turned 24, and I defected from the Unor and located my mother. I grew up aboard ships travelling between merc stations and trading posts." "That must have been exciting for a while." Zira's clear citrine gaze seemed to see right through her. Lenora shrugged. "It was when I was young and craved adventure. It took me a long time to realise that I wanted something different, wanted to be different." She reached out a gentle fingertip to touch the wooden frame of the door. "I would give anything to have memories like this of home." Zira reached over and squeezed her around her shoulders. "It's never too late to make memories. You get to decide where you will make your home." Lenora nodded. "I think Dalat could be a home eventually." "There you are then. Come on, let's catch up to the others. Until you make your own home, I don't mind if you share mine." Zira squeezed her shoulder affectionately one more time, then led her towards the dining hall. They had only gone a few steps when a creature screeched and launched itself from the shadows at Zira. Lenora tensed, but Zira laughed in delight. "Hello, bandit!" She reached down, and the creature leaped up into her arms. It was fuzzy, its fur dark red that lightened to pale gold on its muzzle, paws and belly. Large black eyes in the front of its head sat over an elongated muzzle with fluffy circular ears that twitched and rotated. It reached out a long neck and sniffed at Lenora over Zira's shoulder. Hello, bandit," offered Lenora tentatively. Zira laughed as they walked towards the mess hall. "Bandit here found Odrin and I when we were on the crater mission. He's incredibly intelligent and has adopted us. He likes it on the ship, and Castie spoils him endlessly." When they reached the dining room, it was small and intimate. In a traditional Falosian style, the tables were low, with heavily embroidered jewel-coloured cushions spread around. Everything was panelled in light wood, with coloured lights illuminating fretwork from behind, casting rainbow shadows. A vegetarian feast was laid out. Little bowls and platters contained dozens of different vegetable dishes. The others had already started, each piling their plates full from the selection in front of them. Lenora dropped her gear off to the side and slid into place, eyeing the food with enthusiasm. "This looks great. I haven't had tlacha since Falosia. Where did you get it?" She picked up one of the stuffed roasted mushrooms and bit into it, making appreciative oohs as the juices burst in her mouth. "Castie can reproduce the foodstuffs from the genetic sequences we provided. It has also started growing some of my favourites from seeds we brought with us," responded Zira, as she handed a piece of shredded fruit to Bandit, who held it in his delicate front claws to nibble. They ate in silence, exchanging small talk for a few minutes before Zira spoke. "Where will you go to meet Dutak?" Lenora considered as she chewed. "I am out of the loop. I don't know where their current bases are. My best bet will be to go to one of their public fronts and ask for an audience." She eyed the team around the table. "My father was not pleased with me for leaving the clan. He may well choose not to see me." Luke shrugged. We'll deal with that when it happens. The best option would be to go to Rila's. There is a large spice merchant exchange in the South Port. It is a legitimate business, but has also been used as a cover by my family in the past. I should be able to get a message to him from there. We'll drop Luke and Lenora off at the conference first in case we need to wait around for a response. Vordan asked, "How will we get there? We can't arrive in Castie, we'll cause a riot. But if we arrive in just a flitter, it'll cause suspicion. They'll want to know where our ship is." Odrin smiled mischievously. "Leave that to us. We can't share all our secrets." Lenora looked at Lenora, compassion in her eyes. "What will you tell your family? They'll want to know what all this is for. The truth up to a point, that I am running a mission that I need a Merc cover story for, and we're willing to pay. They take all sorts of gigs. If I present it as an offer of a job, they might go for it." Her brow furrowed. "We will need to be very careful what we say. They are fiercely intelligent and highly trained. They have been the controlling cartel in this region for over 150 years. If you give them even a hint of what is happening, they'll have your planet out from under you before you can blink." She looked at Vordan directly for the first time, and was struck by his Verit beauty. The Verit males were genetically engineered to be warriors, their DNA spliced with a cocktail of feline and alien DNA. They were a handsome people, coloured in a palette of winter. With metallic hair fibres and pale skin, they often appeared carved from stone. Vordan was true to type, with dark, iron-grey long hair braided in their traditional style and pale skin. Like all Verit, his jaw was subtly stronger and his cheekbones sharper than you would expect for a humanoid species, as a result of his humanoid feline dental structures. He was beautiful. Judging by his outburst at the briefing, he was also an arrogant fool. He was probably used to the Verit maman falling all over him and his beauty easing the way for him. "Try to contain your excitement and your runaway mouth. You must act as if you've flown with Lenoriel for years. These people don't take kindly to barbs and insults from newbies." He bristled at her words and tone as she intended. He had irritated her from the first, with his brash manner and handsome face, his childish romanticism and enthusiasm about her life. She wasn't sure why she was picking a fight rather than just ignoring the moron, but something pushed her to goad him. Despite his raised hackles, his tone was mild in response. "Don't stab at me because you are afraid of seeing your family again. You're right, I don't know you, but you don't know me either. I spent a decade flying Merc ships. Don't put your judgment onto me, my lady. Take your bad mood out on someone else." She hissed in fury at his response. He grinned at her. "What's wrong, princess? Not used to people telling the great Lenoriel off?" She exploded. "How dare you? I'm a military officer. I'm not some spoiled, kept lady." He leaned back, stretching lazily to deliberately antagonize her. "Then act like it. Stop throwing a tantrum." She opened her mouth to scold him when Lucius roared, "Enough!" She closed her mouth with a click, flushing in embarrassment. She had forgotten her audience. "You are both officers, and this is unacceptable conduct. You are dismissed for today. Take some time to cool off and find out a way to work together. This mission is too important for your bickering." Vordan went to retort, but thought better of it when he saw Luke's expression. He swallowed whatever he was going to say. "Yes, First Warrior. My apologies, Gadek." He stood and bowed stiffly and marched out. Lenora glared at Lucius for a long moment, daring him to order a Gadek, before she noticed her Falosian companions. Zira was staring at her in astonishment, her face caught between amusement and incredulity at her outburst. Lenora looked at her with open concern and shook her head slightly. "Very well, I will retire as well." She grabbed her plate and walked through the door. She stomped through the corridors before she realized she had no idea where she was going. Gradually, as her temper cooled, she began to feel like an idiot. Lenora did not lose her temper. Scratching at some male that insulted her was a very Lenoriel thing to do. It scared her how fast she was slipping back into her old habits. "Castie, are you there?" "Yes, Lenora." "Where are my quarters?" A pale blue light appeared at the bottom of the wall on her left. "Follow the light." She wandered through the wooden corridors, getting increasingly lost. Inside Castie, it seemed like there was something just a little odd with the proportions. The ship seemed much bigger than it should be. Eventually, the blue light slid up the wall to outline a doorway. She stepped through into a large Falosian room, The wood floors continued inside, as did the domed ceiling. In the centre was a sunken fire pit, open on all sides with a circular bench surrounding it, covered in more of the jewel-toned cushions. The large low bed was set into a sleeping alcove in the corner to her right, piled high with comforters, cushions and throws. It was a delightful dark nest to sleep in. Access to a washroom lay on the wall to her left, next to a large entertainment screen with more floor cushions in front of the screen on layered woven rugs in pink, dark purple and teal. The most incredible feature of the room was the large picture window, which took up the entire wall opposite the door, leading to a balcony carved of light sandstone, overlooking the black sand beach and waves below. It was stunning. Despite still being early in the day, she was exhausted. The past 24 hours had been a series of emotional upheavals she had been completely unprepared for. She had stayed up late reading the briefing pack and had not slept on the shuttle over. She eyed the washroom entrance. She was certain that a bath and a nap would significantly improve her mood. Grudgingly, she admitted she owed that flyboy idiot an apology. It was not his fault that she was angry and needed to vent. He had simply been a convenient target. She moved into the washroom, delighted to see the deep carven stone tub. Yes, a bath and a nap would fix lots of things. Chapter 3. Getting to Know You. Lenora was awakened by a knock on her door. She was deeply asleep, and the knock came from light years away. She dragged herself out of bed to the doorway, opening it to find a bright-eyed and smiling Vordan. "What?" she grumped. His grin didn't budge. "Would my lady like to join me for breakfast?" "Breakfast? We just had lunch." He cocked an eyebrow at her. "Check the time. You slept 18 hours straight. It's 0800 and we have a mission to plan." She stood still in shock for a moment before her brain finally clicked into gear. Belatedly, she realized she was in the fluffy pants and oversized tee that she slept in. When she had emerged from her bath, her luggage had been waiting for her in her room. Vordan was doing a good job of not grinning like a lunatic at her. Goddess knew what her hair looked like. It was tightly curled, and she usually wore it slicked back in a regulation bun to stop it going everywhere. But she had been so exhausted after her bath last night that she had collapsed into bed without doing her usual routine. She was fairly sure it had developed into a bird's nest on her head. "All right, give me 15 minutes." He bowed formally. "I await the lady's pleasure." She examined him suspiciously, but could find nothing but sincerity in his expression or emotional resonance. With a sigh, she shut the door and began prepping for her day. She clucked when she saw her hair. She didn't have time to scrape it into her usual style, so she settled for wrapping it up on top of her head with a pretty scarf she had. It wasn't exactly regulation, but then they were travelling on an ancient alien ship to meet her family, where she was going to pose as head of a criminal cartel once more. She supposed regulations about the neatness of her hair were a low priority right now. She dragged on her pale blue military jumpsuit and strapped her weapons belt to her waist. When she opened the door, Vordan was waiting in the hallway patiently, leaning against the opposite wall. She noted he had also changed his attire slightly. The Verit males in the colony had realized that most of the females were vegetarian, and wearing their traditional manhood furs made them somewhat uncomfortable. They had taken to wearing just plain black jumpsuits. Away from Falosia, Vordan had taken the opportunity to wear what she suspected was more normal for a Verit male, a tight-fitting black leather vest over black cargo pants with a knee-length fur trimmed overcoat. She had to admit that it suited him. The fur was a dark, dark green of an animal she didn't recognize. She snorted. With his braids and all the leather, he looked more like a pirate than she did. The old Lenora would have loved him. Might well have dragged him to her bed. A fast-talking, charming mercenary pilot clad in leather. Yum. But Lenora... She knew all too easily how fickle his type of male could be. How quickly they could drop you when they realized they couldn't get their way. "This is a new look," she offered, as he fell into step with her. He jerked slightly, surprised at her comment before preening. "You like it?" "I wanted to fit the overall look of the Unor." "It looks good on you," she replied. There was no need to lie. He knew he looked good. Probably thought he could sweeten her temper that way. "Thank you, my lady." "Why do you do that?" "What? Call me my lady. I'm not a lady, not when I was her and not as I am now." He looked at her strangely. "It's polite." After a long pause, he continued. It says more about me and how I treat females than it does the female. He paused again. Does it bother you? She gave his question genuine consideration, touched by his answer. No, not really. But my family will think it strange. I would never have accepted it before. What should I call you then? She shrugged. My goddess? She barked a laugh. No. He pretended to ponder, and she didn't miss the mischievous glance in his eye. Your worship? Nope. Let's see. Arrogant bearing, confident, in control. Queen? Pirate queen? Not a chance. Warlord, warlady, warperson. You're enjoying this, she accused. Politeness is part of civilized society, he responded stoically, and she couldn't help laughing outright. Seriously, what shall I call you? She stilled, then smiled. My crew always called me Hulla. It means in charge. He huffed, and she mock-glared at him again. But my friends and family called me El. He smiled at her, delighted that she would allow him to use her clan name. Very well, El. I didn't say we were friends. He snorted in laughter at her acerbic tone. They reached the dining hall in just a few minutes, and Lenora became instantly suspicious. She had wandered for nearly half an hour the night before. Perhaps Castie had decided that she needed a walk to cool off. It was just the two of them. When they sat down, Castie produced another vegetarian meal for them, this time a simple vegetable soup with bread. So, tell me what I should know about Lenoriel. What will they expect me to know? She shrugged. Honestly, I don't know. I haven't been home in a decade. It's reasonable for people to change a lot in that time. Where did you grow up? He seemed genuinely interested. His eyes lit up with curiosity that was distinctly feline. On Unor ships and stations. Before my father became head of the clan, he ran their logistics, moving all the cargo we traded or stole. I worked with him and I was good at it. No one could get anything past customs like I could. My family on my father's side is huge and we all worked for the clan. I have 9 brothers and sisters from different mothers and fathers. There are 55 aunts and uncles at last count and hundreds of cousins. Vordan paused with his spoon in midair. Are you joking? Nope, my father is Tritora. Vordan blinked, then carefully ate his soup. Tritora are not human template. Nope, they are reptile descendant. How could he, with your mother? He looked so awkward to be asking her, she laughed aloud. Tritora are highly adaptable. They are gender fluid and can breed with every known species. They also have a limited chameleon ability. They can't change some things like body mass or brain organ composition, but superficially they can adjust their looks, body composition and gender to a species preference. He looked so abashed that she reached out and bopped him on his nose. Don't be speciest, Vordan. The Unor are so successful because they are composed of many different species. They harness the skills of all those that come to them. If you can't interact with other species, especially non-human template, then you should bail out now. No, you're right, I've got it. Just, did you inherit anything from your father? He looked her over frankly, and she stiffened in annoyance. You look Falosian. That is an inappropriate question, pilot, that you don't need to know the answer to. It is well outside the mission parameters. His face went purple with embarrassment. My apologies, lady, you are correct, it won't happen again. She nodded solemnly, accepting his apology. Tell me about yourself, she commanded, attempting to move away from more personal matters. He nodded. I am a par-ranked pilot, Verit warrior mercenary class. I am trained in ship-to-ship combat and spent a decade in Clan Tothus, who act as an army for hire. I have fought wars the length of Alliance space. I am qualified to pilot any shuttle or small attack ship, up to a Class 3. I'm also qualified to pilot Verit, Falosian and Alliance standard transport, freight and large attack cruisers up to Class 9. Weapons proficiency. I have master-level certifications in energy and particle weapons. Verit males are also trained in blade work and martial arts. Good. Anything else? He grinned broadly at her and fanned out his hands. Large, sharp claws extended 2 inches above his fingertips. They did not grow from his fingertips like in the entertainment reels, but appeared over them. I'm an expert at hand-to-hand combat too. She examined them in wonder, reached a hand out to touch one, pulling back when she realized what she had done. He smiled at her and held out his right hand for her examination. They are incredible. May I touch them? He nodded. She trailed her fingertips over his, noting the channels for the retractable claws behind his more human-like nail beds. The claws extended over his human nails and sheathed them. They shone slightly, and as she lifted them up, she noted slightly metallic fibers in the nail structure, similar to those in his hair. How do they work with your finger joints? The tops of our fingers are slightly longer than normal for the human template, providing space for the nail sheaths to sit in them. The nails curve around the bone, see? He demonstrated extending and retracting his claws a few times for her. Once she saw them, she noticed the slight differences in the musculature and bones of his hands. It had been camouflaged by the overall largeness of Verit males. These are amazing. Even if you were disarmed, you would never be without a weapon. He winced slightly. Some of our enemies have become wiser over time, and there have been cases where they have removed claws or cut the tops of fingers off altogether. It is extremely painful and not repairable by normal medical means. She nodded again. Thank you for showing me. He smiled, pleased that he was back in her good graces. Now you. Fair is fair. I want your story. She supposed he was right. It was only fair. Like I said, I grew up with Dutak on Unor clan ships and stations, running logistics and evading customs. When I was in my late teens, we got ourselves mixed up in a clan war. One of our allies, Branawan clan, started a war with the Galatian syndicate. It was brutal and bloody, and they were stupid to get involved with it. You can't beat Galatians on their own turf. Branawan wanted our support. We were considering it. We really don't like getting involved in other people's wars, and we did business with the Galatians. But one of my father's sisters had married the Branawan chief, and she was pressuring us to help them. She stopped and took a long sip of her water to give herself a moment. The Galatians gave us a little warning against getting involved. They kidnapped several members of my family, including my younger sister Ariel, who is half Galatian on her father's side. My father weighed up the options and decided not to get involved. It was bad for business. I thought he would negotiate for Ariel's release, but that was bad for business as well. He has lots of children, and he couldn't let the Galatians know that he would give them concessions every time they kidnapped us, or it would be open season for us all. She swallowed against a surge of remembered fear. He told Branawan and the Galatians that he wouldn't get involved, to sort out their issues themselves. Then he decided to bomb the Galatian base, to send his own message that no one controls Dutak Unor, no one manipulates the clan. When she looked up at Vordan again, her eyes were burning with rage. That rat bastard was going to bomb the base with his own daughter on board. My Ari. Ari is gentle. She was an artist. She laughed bitterly. Father put her to work making forgeries. She was an expert at it, but her true skill was art. She could have been one of the greatest artists of our age. She shook off her anger, pulling together the shreds of her composure. I decided to get Ari out. I took my ship, the Black Sun, and a few of my friends and cousins, and we infiltrated the base. We found her. They had tortured her, beaten her, but she was alive. I brought her home and bombed the fucking base myself. She scooped up a spoonful of soup and ate it with slow deliberation. My father was so proud. He was the one that named me the Black Valkyrie. It was the start of my reputation, a true daughter of Dutak. Out of all his children, I was the one most like him. She couldn't help the bitterness lacing her words. Vordan reached out and placed a gentle hand on her wrist. You know that's not true, Lenora. I don't know you well, but even I know you would never sacrifice someone you cared about for a mission. She forced herself to unclasp her hand from the spoon. Perhaps, she replied non-committally. I worked my way up in the clan for years. Eventually I just got sick of it. The people, the lifestyle, all of it. I found my mother. When I did, she was living on Falosia. She had retired. She was a bodyguard and a commercial negotiation empath. That's how she had met my father. She monitored a deal he was doing. Did you live with her? Lenora shook her head. I could never forgive her for leaving me with him. She had her reasons, but too much had happened. She smiled. I met Morale in my second week there, in a bar. I was determined to drink away my sorrows, and she found me hiding in a hole in the wall selling cheap wine. She was the one that offered me an alternative path, asked me to consider working for the Falosians. They needed someone with my skills. Eventually, I told her who I really was, and she organized an alliance pardon for me in exchange for plying my very specific trade on behalf of the Falosians. Morale, the cadet. She is my oldest friend. When she called and told me she had accepted the colony governor's position, I thought she was mad. I thought she was crazier still when she asked me to come with her. What the hell would I do in a colony? She laughed again, this time light, not bitter at all. She saved me in so many ways. I found honor in using my skills to serve my planet, and I was ready to rest. The colony surprised me. I loved it. I loved the ruggedness of the landscape, the challenge of building something from scratch, of making a life there. She sighed. I thought I'd never do this again. I thought I'd buried Lenora for good. But when Morale asked, I couldn't say no. I owe her everything. He reached over and took her hand, looking at her with admiration writ clear on his face. I understand that this is hard for you, Lenora, but I think you might be one of the strongest people I've ever met. Once this is over, you can go back to the colony, pick up your life. This is only temporary. He paused. If I've learned anything in a decade of fighting, it's that you can bear anything for a while. She squeezed his hand gently in thanks for this support. She pulled her hands away and scrubbed her face. You're right. Time to end the pity party for one and put on my big girl pants. He nodded, his eyes kind. She was touched. In her experience, kindness, compassion and understanding were rare jewels to find in people, so unexpected in someone like Vordan. Perhaps she had judged him too quick, failed to see beyond the cocky, flyboy surface. As for my skills, I'm an expert in interstellar travel and interstellar negotiations. I am trained to command ship-to-ship battles and in infiltration and espionage. Every port, every planet I have contacts in. There is no one I can't find, nothing I can't get through, nothing I can't procure if needed. Before I became the Black Valkyrie, they used to call me the Fixer. She smiled grimly. The Unor do love their little code names. She smoothed her jumpsuit cuff. I am best with long-range energy and particle weapons, although Zira has been training me in Delmalayat for years. Vordan nodded appreciatively. Delmalayat, the Falosian martial art, was perfectly adapted for a smaller female body mass. It was deadly when applied by someone with training, and Zira was an acknowledged master. She had recently begun training some of the Verit males as well. Lenora looked down, realizing that she had finished her soup. Thank you for listening. I haven't told the story in a long time. I think that I've been trying to forget her. It's unsettling, the prospect of pulling her skin back on. Vordan nodded again. I'll be there with you. Whatever you need, just let me know. Chapter 4. Rila's. They reached Haven the next day, a Gen 2 Alliance colony of the planet Nirvana. It was unremarkable in its imports and exports, but boasted more financial institutions per capita than any other planet in the Alliance, thanks to its extremely low tax rates and favourable trading legislation. The conference was being held in a large resort, and they waited nearly a day for their assigned shuttle window. The sky was dotted with hundreds of small craft flitting back and forth. When their assigned flight window finally came, Vordan piloted their shuttle down to the surface and back in less than an hour, dropping Dinara and Lucius off at the plush shuttle bay attached to the hotel where the conference was being held. Lenora largely avoided Vordan for the next 2 days. The unexpected intimacy of their discussion left her feeling exposed, so she resolved to keep her distance for now, until she could corral her surging emotions. She spent most of her time with Zira and Skara, brushing up on her martial arts training and refashioning her Lenoriel wardrobe with Castie. Zira walked her through the Falosian-style corridors to Castie's fabrication room. The chamber was a smooth oval, in the featureless matte black that seemed to be Castie's default state. The materialization pod was in the center, with a low console with a screen off to one side. Castie, please enable Lenora's access to materialization design functions, instructed Zira. Confirmed, access granted. Welcome, Lenora. Zira smiled at her. I'll leave you two to it. Let me know if you need anything. Lenora meandered over to the screen and tapped the green flashing icon. It pulled up a menu that she was unfamiliar with. Castie, I don't know how to use this system. You may simply instruct me what you would like, and I will develop a preliminary design for your review. I see. Is there anything that you can't create? Many things. Can you be more specific? Perhaps you could tell me what you want, and I will tell you if I can make it or not. I need attire, weapons, and some technical devices. That should all be feasible. Let us start with attire. I think you and I are going to be excellent friends, Castie. Lenora took a deep breath. All righty, I need... Lenora spent hours with Castie, provisioning their supplies. They reached Rila's the following day. Odrin summoned them to the control room, which proved to be a circular chamber with a raised gantry and 360-degree viewing walls. Odrin wasted no time in explaining their plan. When we reach Rila's, Castie will cloak. We will be undetectable by any technology we are currently aware of. We will generate a fake trail to suggest that a cloaked Malurian vessel passed by and dropped off your shuttle in case anyone comes looking. We can stay here for several days. Castie will communicate with you via HUD channel. He paused, looking pained. Castie has teleportation capabilities. In a pinch, we may be able to teleport you out. But you should know we haven't really tested it and do not know its limits. We'd also like to keep the tech secret for now, so if you need to teleport, best not to do it in public if you can. Lenora and Vordan looked at each other in delight. Teleport? Like actual beaming technology? Yes, like I said, it's a secret. Right, acknowledged. A secret, responded Lenora, still grinning. There was a long pause and she elbowed Vordan, who hid a laugh with a cough. Yeah. Confirmed. Not a word. Odrin looked to the ceiling, muttering a prayer to the goddess for strength. Do you need anything else? Asked Zira. No, Castie fabricated everything I needed. The ship is a marvel. I just need to change and grab my gear from my room. Best do that now then. We'll be there in 10 minutes. One more thing. Lenora looked at Skara, who had been silent throughout the exchange. Skara looked uncomfortable with the attention. I will stay here. Lenora raised an eyebrow at her. May I ask why? Surely you must have wondered why I was sent on this mission. I am hardly the first pick for espionage. Lenora nodded. She had wondered, but it wasn't her job to question orders. She had to admit that she had been concerned about the young female among the Unor clan. I have specialist skills that will be of use when we are hacking the Svobodans. You're a hacker. Skara smiled grimly. I can hack anything. I believe the word they keep using is prodigy. I would be a liability in this phase of the mission, so I will stay on board until I'm needed. I have been trained to run data and intel for operations. Very well. Thank you for letting me know. We will be in touch through comms. Lenora nodded to everyone again and spun on her heel. Honestly, it was a relief not to have to worry about Skara. It was one less thing on her plate to deal with. With every step she took, her legs became more leaden. She had been resisting turning back into Lenoriel for the longest time. With the prospect of changing into her clothes, it suddenly seemed very real. She reached her chambers and looked at the outfit she had left on the bed. A far cry from her military jumpsuit, Lenoriel had gone for dark and dangerous. The outfit comprised of dark red leather pants and jacket woven through with sin armor threads that shimmered in the light. Under the jacket she wore a reinforced black tank that laced up the sides, designed to give her movement while fighting. Over it all flowed a black rough skin jacket that absorbed the light and was impervious to scanning. In addition to making it harder to see her body outline, and therefore harder to shoot her, it had particle weapon deflection technology and billowed in the slightest breeze. It looked decidedly impressive. She sighed as she pulled the garments on. Her younger self had been very dramatic. She had soaked up the attention that came with being the Black Valkyrie, had commanded respect and fear wherever she went. Half of the trick was projecting confidence and assurance, and this outfit conveyed that in spades. Next to Dawn were her boots. Thick-soled with a solid grip, they clipped up the sides to just under her knees. The thick soles had low-level anti-grav plates sewn in. Not enough to actually fly, but enough to give her an edge in maneuverability, speed and lightness in a fight. Finally, she pulled on her headpiece. The black gem-studded circlet wrapped around her forehead and down behind her ears. While it appeared decorative, aside from having a whole host of useful tech, it served the more prosaic purpose of taming and holding back her wild mane of hair. She stood examining herself in the full-length mirror, turning this way and that. She smiled slightly to herself. Okay, she had to admit that she looked good. She looked like the avenging Valkyrie from the old stories that she had been named for. She strapped on her weapons belt. The finishing touch was to let down her hair. Lenoriel had been incredibly vain about it, and had spent hours and a truly obscene amount of credits on oils, creams and treatments. She snorted at the folly of her younger self. One particularly intelligent adversary had actually nearly succeeded in killing her by tracking her spending and determining her preferred shampoo, and poisoning an entire shipment in an effort to kill her. She took a deep breath and took out the tie, shaking free her mane of hair. It curled and twined in a million spirals down to her butt. The weight laid heavy against her neck, instantly making her sweaty, and the thought made her laugh. Suffer for beauty, Ella, as her Malati had always said. She shook off the remaining melancholy as she grabbed her bags and strode towards the shuttle bay, constructing her armor in her mind as she went. When she stepped into the bay, she heard the wolf whistles before she saw the others. Zira, Skara and Vordan were standing next to a small, sleek flitter. Zira whistled again. "Damn, female, why were you hiding that hair? It's glorious!" Lenora smiled. "Thank you. I hide it because it's a complete pain in the ass to maintain." "It's amazing." Vordan smiled, his eyes drinking in her entire form. "You look every inch the pirate queen, Lenora." She laughed. "My father read stories to me from Earth about pirate queens. I so badly wanted to be one." How she regretted her childish folly. "Call me Elle, best get used to it now." He nodded and bowed gallantly. "Ready to come aboard, my queen?" "You got it, flyboy." She winked at him and dropped her pack at his feet, flicking at it with a finger as she sauntered past. "Bring the bags." Skara sniggered at them and Vordan guffawed. "Yes, ma'am." Zira embraced her. "Take care, sister. Don't lose yourself again." Lenora hugged her back tight, fear clogging her throat. She swallowed convulsively. "I won't. I know who I am." It was a promise to herself as much as Zira. Zira pulled back, her eyes solemn. "Are you sure? We go through lots of incarnations of ourselves in life. Perhaps this will help you find your next one." The moment drew out before she smiled wickedly, throwing a glance at Vordan loading the bags. "But have some fun doing it, okay? That man is fiend and you look like the goddess herself." She slapped Lenora playfully on the butt as she danced out of range, her laughter glittering in the air. "Be safe." Lenora nodded a last time and entered the flitter. She settled herself in the passenger seat of the small cockpit and awaited her pilot. Instinctively, she sat with the military bearing that she had adopted these past few years. She clucked her tongue at herself. She had to be smarter than that. She leaned back and slouched, swinging one leg over the armrest in practiced indolence. When Vordan entered, he noticed the change immediately, but wisely kept silent. He had been stunned with Lenora. No, he thought, Elle had emerged in her pirate queen outfit. Gone was the contained, controlled military officer. She had been replaced with a stunning, raven-haired vixen, with eyes that shone like the sun and skin pale as the moon. He could easily see her leading her team on a raid. Even the way she moved was different. It disturbed him, the ease with which she could change herself so completely. Left him wondering who the real female was. The trip to Rila's was short, both of them contemplating the journey ahead in a surprisingly comfortable silence. Their only communication was when she directed him to a specific landing terminal in the southern port. He followed her out of the ship, leaving their things on board for now, into the chaos of the concourse. Rila's was a planet composed entirely of markets. Everything conceivable could be bought or sold here, and from where he was standing he could see dozens of different species. The concourse was wide, with a high glass-domed ceiling above terraced shopfronts. The ground level was filled with food vendors of every style, with the goods increasing in price and rarity as the levels increased. His feline senses were stunned by the mixture of aromas from the food, from the chatter of thousands of different voices and languages. "Keep a hand on your valuables at all times. Most clans train their children here at the port," Lenora murmured, and he nodded in return. He had already noticed the groups of tiny children running fleet-footed through the crowd. "How far away is your family's business?" "Not far. They are just outside the port, 3 streets to the south." She took off, striding through the crowd with confidence, head held high, and he trailed in her wake, observing how people instinctively scurried out of her path. "Do you think you'll be recognized?" "Of course. I suspect someone has already alerted my family that I am here. They control this entire region. They—" "Elle!" a voice screamed over the hubbub, and the crowd parted to reveal a tiny female running towards them. He tensed to defend as the female launched herself at Lenora, who caught the smaller female in a bear hug and spun her around. As she did, Vordan saw the diaphanous wings, the overly large jewel-coloured eyes on her delicate build, and blinked. The female was Galatean. He had never seen one in the flesh before. They were highly popular on the intergalactic entertainment net for their grace, beauty, and incredible mimic abilities. "Ari!" Lenora cried as she clung to the smaller female, who hit at her with tiny balled fists as she cried and laughed at once. "You bitch! Where the hell have you been? 10 years with only the odd message, and then you just stroll into the port like nothing has happened." "I'm sorry," I have so much— Ari cut her off, talking over her. Do you know how hard we looked for you? Mother turned the sector upside down. I know, I'll explain. You'd better have a good explanation, or Melody might murder you herself. Lenora laughed and disentangled herself from the female, placing her on the ground. Vordan noted the hulking males that had encircled the two females as they greeted each other, each with the typical hard eyes and overdeveloped musculature of bodyguards. Care to introduce us, Elle? He inquired. Both females turned to look at him, and the little one's eyes went wide. Oh, sister, he's delightful. She practically purred, stroking a tiny finger along his green-furred lapel. Is this why you've come back? You've brought your mate home to meet the family? He was too stunned to respond, her forward manner so unexpected. Lenora laughed again and pulled the little one's hand off him. I'll explain everything to father. This is Vordan. Vordan, this is my sister Ariel. He flashed her a charming smile and bowed elegantly, and she chuckled in response, sounding like little bells ringing. Sister, you'll have your hands full with this one. He's entirely too charming for his own good. Ariel turned back to Lenora, and in a blink she changed. Gone was the sweet, joyful female, and in its place was a tiny queen. Now, sister, tell me why you have come back. Her voice was iron. Lenora blinked at the rapid change. Like I said, Ari, I'll explain to father. Dutak is not here, you will explain to me. I run the South Port now. Lenora's eyebrows shot up. When did that happen? Ariel smiled tightly. You didn't think we'd all just stay as we were when you left us? We are not dolls to be put back in the closet when you don't want to play with us. Your leaving left a big hole in the business. We all had to take on other duties. This is mine. I see. I'm sorry, Ari. I didn't realize. Ari laughed again, but this time the smile didn't reach her eyes. Why are you sorry, Elle? I like my work and I'm good at it. Our operations have expanded 5 times since I've been in charge. Now this is the last time I'll ask. Tell me why you are here. If you won't answer, you'd best get back on that pretty little ship with your pretty male, because you won't set foot out of the port without my approval. There was no give in her voice, and Vordan was certain that she meant it. He eyed the nearest bodyguard, who smiled at him with a mouthful of crocodile teeth, daring him to try anything. I have a job, a proposal for the Unor. Ari raised an eyebrow. Really? I heard you joined the military on Falosia. She nearly spit the word, her voice dripping with disdain. What does the Falosian military want from the Unor? I will only discuss it in private, sister. If Ari's voice was iron, Lenora's was pure ice. The sisters eyed each other for a long moment, the tension palpable. Is that it? You came all this way in person just to make us a job offer. We do have comms, you know. You could have just called at any point in the past 10 years. Even Ari's poise and anger couldn't hide the hurt in her voice, and he saw the barb land with Lenora. He saw her calculation, saw her consider how much to say next. Lenora turned to him, an apology in her eyes. No, that's not all, Lenora replied. She reached over and took Vordan's hand and pulled him to her. Instinctively, he slid his arm up to her shoulder, wrapping himself around her. You're right. I wanted to introduce you to my mate, Vordan. Vordan froze for a split second, shock dashing through his system, before his brain caught up with what was happening. He smiled charmingly, leaning his body into Lenora, following her lead. Ari stilled for a long moment as she looked at them both, her eyes widening. Really? You finally let some male catch you? Her eyes filled with tears, and Vordan was shocked when Ari embraced him, peppering his cheeks with kisses. He was going to have whiplash. Things were changing too fast around him. This is wonderful. Welcome to the family, brother. Thank you. He eventually managed to put his hands on her shoulders to push her away. She clapped her hands in excitement. We must celebrate. She turned and motioned to a guard who peeled off from the others and began moving through the crowd. Let's head home. We can talk business and introduce your male to the family. They followed her to a side door to the concourse and found the male she had sent ahead sitting in a small, open-topped hover vehicle. They piled inside, and before Vordan knew it, he was sandwiched against Lenora and a bodyguard as they sped above the Rila's markets in the bright sunshine. Below them, the fabric-covered awnings changed colours as they moved through the different zones, and the warm breeze playfully tugged at his hair. We aren't going to the spice merchants? Lenora asked, and he saw Ari shake her head. No, we outgrew that years ago. We took over the Luton Temple on Metal Hill. Ari looked at him. Metal Hill is where the jewelers are. It's lovely. The temple has plenty of space for us. It's an enclosed compound. They travelled over the planet, the smells and sounds overpowering. He felt the tension thrumming through Lenora where her arm, hip and thigh were pressed against him. She was strung so tight he was afraid she would snap. He reached out and patted her knee, and she clamped her hand down on top of his in a white-knuckled grip before she gradually relaxed her hold, gently braceleting his wrist. When they arrived at the temple, he was disappointed. It was a long, low, single-story building at the top of a hill in a quiet area. The sandy-coloured stone was elegant and time-worn. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but from Ari's brief description, he had thought it would be a hive of activity, not this slightly faded historic elegance. His shoulders prickled and he turned to see the females watching him. "Well, what do you think?" Ari asked. He examined the structure again. "It's charming," he replied. But nothing," he shrugged. Lenora and Ari exchanged a glance and burst out laughing. For the first time he saw the similarity in the sisters that their exterior differences had hidden. "Okay, Spill, what's the trick? What, don't you think we live and work in this charming home?" Ari asked innocently. Lenora rolled her eyes. "Stop teasing, Ari. Come, let me show you one of our secrets." Ari snorted. "It's not that much of a secret." Lenora aimed a playful whack at her, and Ari danced out of the way elegantly, slightly lifting off of the ground as she fluttered her gentle wings for maneuverability. She led the way up the deep, shallow, curved stone steps and opened a small carved wooden door, set into a giant set of double doors. "Welcome to temple, sister. May the goddess bless you." "As the goddess wills it," came Vordan's automatic response, and Ari whirled at him, her eyes squinting. "I knew it! You're Verit! What clan?" she demanded, her fists on her hips. "I am Dathalka now, but I was Tothas." Her eyes glittered and she turned to Lenora. "Wait until Mother hears you mated with a Verit. Her head might explode." Vordan felt his stomach sink as he looked at Lenora. Would their ruse make the mission more difficult? Did her family hate Verit? She smiled faintly at him and shook her head in dismissal of his query. "Welcome, new brother, to the goddess Luton Temple." Ari walked them through the antechamber into an open courtyard soaked in sunshine, and his jaw dropped as he approached the railing. Falling away before him were terraces marching down the side of the mountain. The temple was built into the crest, and hundreds, no, thousands of personnel scurried like ants along the walkways. As far as he could see, the temple was a series of interconnected chambers, courtyards and gardens, linked by a lacework of bridges, stairs, hover platforms, elevators and pathways in elegant tiers. Lenora walked up to the railing and stood with him silently, her eyes taking in the view. "Did you know?" he asked her. She nodded. "We used to play here as children, but this—" She turned to Ari and held out her hand to her sister. "I'm so proud of you, Ari. This is incredible. So many people." She was stunned. Ari squeezed her hand back. "Thank you, Ella. You have no idea how much it means to me to hear that from you." She blinked rapidly, her jewel eyes wet with unshed tears. "Come on." She led them down a pathway, through a courtyard and down a winding series of paths and corridors. Before long he was lost, and he began to appreciate the tactical brilliance of this location. Even if it was breached, the chances of someone finding a way out were minimal. Eventually they reached another double set of doors. Ari looked at them, flashing a smile one more time, and threw the doors open dramatically. "Uno, one of our own has returned to us." She moved aside and dragged Lenora by her arm into the light of the chamber. There was silence for a moment, like the world held its breath, before the room erupted in shouts, comments, shrieks. Vordan was in shock. He had never seen such a diverse group of beings. There must have been nearly 30 people, each of a different species, lounging around in the enormous area. The room was dotted with sofas, small tables and desks, somewhere between a family room and an open-plan office. Central to it all was a circle of large floor cushions around a long, low table. The inhabitants moved towards them, and he snarled, the sudden movement, unfamiliar territory and unfamiliar people spiking his adrenaline for a fight. His claws snicked out, his fangs lengthening, hormones flooding his body, making him ready for battle, increasing his speed and strength. The red rage descended, and he fought against surrendering to the dark stranger within. The dark stranger that lived in all Verit males, the stranger that fueled their most protective desires and instincts. He dropped his bag and fur wrap and leaped in front of Lenora, snarling at the attackers, ready to defend his female or die trying. "Oh yeah, and she's brought her new mate," chimed in Ari from somewhere outside the doorway. "He's Verit." The inhabitants froze when they saw him, and he felt Lenora's hand run up his spine to settle at the nape of his neck. Her fingers entwined in his hair as she pressed herself against his back. "It's all right, Vordan. They are my family. They won't hurt me." Lenora's words were the barest breath against his neck, raising the hairs down his spine, and then turned his head to her fractionally, indicating he was listening. "Be calm. There is nothing to protect me from here." She stroked again, her fingertips tracing the shell of his ear down his neck. He leaned into that touch for a moment, soaking in the gentle fire as he allowed the dark stranger to be soothed. "You are wary. There is danger here," he countered, his voice still mostly a growl as he struggled to speak past the rage. In her closeness, he could feel the tension still thrumming through her, as it had from the moment she had glimpsed her sister. "There is," she agreed, "but not in this moment, and not the kind you can defend me from with claws. Please don't harm my family." He finally looked at her, saw the pleading in her yellow eyes, and nodded once. He straightened from his defensive crouch, retracting his fangs and claws but staying in front of her, keeping a wary eye on the people before him, daring them to come closer, communicating with his stance that she was his to protect. Her family stared at them curiously for a long moment. "Holy shit, that's hot. Where can I get one?" came a hushed voice. Vordan looked at the speaker, blinking in surprise to see a large Escethian male, all blue skin and metal implants, smiling at him vivaciously. The male raised a hand and wiggled his fingers at him. I want to climb him like a tree," came another voice, and their audience cracked up laughing. He felt some of Lenora's tension drain away, but she stayed pressed against his back, wary. The move looked casual as she leaned on his shoulder, but he could sense that she was unsure of her next step. "Second removed offspring, blood of my blood. It has been a long time." The voice was just above a whisper, primeval and grinding. The audience parted to reveal an ancient bent Tritoran female shuffle towards them. She was so old her scales were dull and matte, and her eyes were pale orbs blind in her cragged face. Lenora froze for a second, before her composure broke and she sank to her knees. "Melati," she whispered, and the tiny ancient one stepped forward and gathered Lenora into her arms, crooning to her as she rocked her. "You have returned to the nest. The stars are right in our world again." Lenora clung to the elder. "Mela, I wrote to you so many times. Why did you never respond?" The elder hissed at her, hurt and anger warring in her expression. "You left, Mela. You sliced us out of your life without a word. It took us 2 years to find you again. You do not get to leave, but still have the net of family to catch you when you fall. There are consequences to actions, child. Family is not a coat you can put on and discard at will. We are Tritau, the nest and root for our river of blood and life in this world. We are strongest together." The elder patted Lenora's face, taking the sting out of her words. "There will be time for that later. Why have you returned?" Lenora sighed and dashed the tears away from her face. "I have a business proposal for the Unor." The elder cocked her head to the side, considering. "We will hear you." She turned and began her slow, painful journey through the group. "Come, Ella, bring your mail. Join us in the circle." She paused. "Everyone else, skit. You can gawp and catch up later." As if by magic, the group dispersed, but Vordan caught many curious looks thrown their way. Within a minute, there were only 6 people left, sitting on the cushions around the low table. Ari helped the elder to sit, then sat by her right hand. An older male with a Malurian appearance, red skin and large black horns, sat next to Ari. On the other side of the elder, a middle-aged feathered female sat. Next was a younger male creature. He was bright orange, with red and yellow striations covering his skin, and a second vestigial pair of arms with short claws on his chest. Vordan had never encountered the species before. Last was a creature that was so stunning he could hardly look at her. He was unsure. It was silver, head to hoof, bright, shining silver as if dipped in paint. Its head was bald and the eyes were pure white, each individual eyelash looking like tiny silvered feathers. At the top, it appeared humanoid and vaguely female, wrapped in beaten black leather armor. From midsection down, feathers appeared, forming a dense silver and gold downy pelt. The legs were sat back on the hips, forcing the torso slightly forward, ending in wicked silver hooves. Wrapped around the legs were an assortment of belts carrying pockets of various items. Taking his cue from Lenora, he kneeled on the floor cushion opposite the elder. Lenora took a deep breath, and he could see her attempting to regain her composure, to rebuild emotional armor after all the shocks of the day. "Clan Uno, I have a business proposal for you from Falosia." The orange male made a skittering noise, and Vordan realized he was rubbing the claws on his vestigial arms together. Lenora looked at him, her expression shuttered. "When I want your opinion, brother, I'll ask for it." The male cocked his head at her, baring fangs in a grimace. "Still a cocky bitch." To Vordan's surprise, Lenora grinned. "Takes one to know one." The male's grimace widened into a grin. "Nice to see being a military drone hasn't dulled your edge, sister." A muscle ticked in Lenora's cheek, but she didn't respond. "Last I heard, you were running logistics on some backwater bum-fuck-nowhere planet. I knew you'd get bored." She ignored the comment, her eyes refocusing on the elder. "I have a proposal, will you hear it?" The elder stared into space, considering, and Vordan waited patiently. Eventually the elder spoke. "We will hear." She placed a hand on Ari's arm. "Ari, convene the clan, all sect leaders to attend tonight at 1900. He felt Lenora jerk, but her words were polite, considered. "I would prefer a private hearing. This is a matter of planetary security." The elder laughed, a rusty sound. "The hearing will be private. The council is to introduce your mate to the clan. You didn't think you could just waltz back in with a mate, and that we'd just accept him on your say-so. If he wishes to mate an Unor daughter, then the clan will meet him." "Can't that wait until—" The elder groaned and slowly got to her feet, aided by those on either side of her. "I have spoken. Ari, make it happen. I must rest. This is too much excitement for my old bones. We will hear your petition tonight after the clan meets at 1900. Lenora reached to grab his hand under the table, squeezing it for support. "Yes, Mela." Ari stood, her arm around the elder. "Luta, will you show our guests to quarters in the Red Wing? And organise some food, please?" Ari cast a hard look at Lenora. "It is good to see you, sister. Do not wander in the complex. Do not impose on our goodwill. You are an outsider here." Lenora squeezed Vordan's hand again, and he felt the blow that her sister's words had struck. Lenora nodded in response, saying nothing. The silver creature motioned for them to follow, and it led them through the winding passageways until they entered an enclosed garden. Luta pointed to a line of red tilework across the threshold of the garden entrance and spoke in a sibilant hiss. "This marks as the entrance to the red zone. You can travel freely in there. Do not cross the threshold without permission." Lenora remained mute, so Vordan responded. "Thank you, Luta." The creature nodded and ushered them into the garden. Inside, the garden comprised a series of rock gardens, shallow pools spilling into each other and little seating areas. It was lovely, clearly designed for calming serenity. Around the perimeter were wrought iron gates. Luta led them to the third gate on the left and opened it with a push to reveal a smaller garden within, just small succulents and a stone bench under a bower and a little cottage. "I will send food." Lenora didn't respond again, and Vordan wondered if she was in some sort of shock, the emotional upheavals of the day catching up with her. He smiled again at Luta. "Thank you." It nodded but said nothing further. It passed a long look at Lenora and raised a bright silver palm to her cheek. It didn't touch her, simply held the palm a hair's breadth from her skin. "Welcome home, Ella." Lenora blinked rapidly, her eyes wet. Finally she responded, her voice husky with pent-up emotions. "Thank you, Luta." It nodded and spun on a hoof to stomp away through the gate. Lenora stared after it aimlessly for a long period, lost in thought. Cautiously, Vordan touched her shoulder. "Shall we inspect our quarters?" She sighed and nodded, and allowed herself to be guided inside. The cottage was comfortably furnished. The furniture was plush and low to the ground. A small sitting area around an entertainment screen, and a curtained-off alcove for a gigantic bed with about 1,000,000 pillows and blankets. On the opposite side from the alcove was a tiny kitchenette, and next to it a door which presumably led to bathing facilities. Everything was in a simple, dark, smooth finish, and the predominant decor was dark blood red with yellow accents. It gave the overall impression of warmth and comfort. Lenora stood in the middle of the room, looking lost. "Are you okay?" She nodded. "You don't look okay. What can I do to help?" She blinked and focused on him. I just need to process. I never thought I'd be here again. It's hard seeing them all, and weirder being in guest quarters rather than family quarters." She sighed and ran a trembling hand through her hair. "I think I need a minute. I just need to process it all." "All right, you rest. I'll scout out the gardens and the wing." She nodded again, and on automatic moved to the sleeping alcove. She began to divest herself of her weapons, boots and coat. "It's odd, they didn't take our weapons," Vordan mused. Lenora shrugged. "They will have scanned us as soon as we walked in. They'd have taken anything they felt they couldn't easily neutralize, but as a general rule, they don't bother. It sends a message." Vordan understood. "Bring your weapons if they make you feel safe. We are so powerful we don't care." Lenora nodded as she sighed and fell into bed in just her leggings and loose tank. "It's the same reason they won't bug these cottages or install surveillance in our rooms." She snuggled down into the covers. "Seems arrogant and dangerous." She snorted a half laugh. "Unor is arrogant. It has caused us problems before and most likely will again. There is a fine line between pride and arrogance, but often in clan interactions confidence goes a long way." Vordan stood in the doorway. Before he left, he hesitated and turned back. "I could have used a little warning about the mating thing." Lenora felt instantly guilty. "I'm sorry to drag you into the ruse, but I didn't see any other way. I know Ari, she meant every word. She would have tossed us out on our arse." "It's all right, I don't mind. I just would have appreciated some warning." He smiled at her. "Can we visit my mother and brothers next? Seems only fair if you introduce me to your family. I get to introduce you to mine. She'll have a conniption that I've mated with a non-Verit, and my brothers will be deathly jealous. It would be worth the hassle having to sneak into Totha's security just to see their faces." She sniggered. "Seems only fair, my beloved." He snorted out a laugh and left her to her contemplation. "Get some rest, Pirate Queen." Lenora took her time, splashing water on her face and then sitting in the resting alcove, meditating. When Lenora next awoke, it took her a few moments to realize where she was. She was warm and cozy, bundled in quilts. A gentle glow filtered in from the curtains, and gradually awareness returned. She was home. After years away, she was back with the Unor. Her eyes snagged on the red trim on the curtains. Not home, not really. Relegated to a red wing, an honoured guest, still in bed, she stretched deliciously, postponing getting up and facing the mess of her life for just a few moments longer. How tempting to stay in this warm nest and just float back to sleep. The sleep had helped in one aspect at least. She was calmer. She had thought that she'd been prepared to meet her family again, but seeing Ari and her Malati after so long, it had hit her like an avalanche. She wasn't sure she would have got through it without Vordan beside her. The idiot flyboy had been surprising, charming enough to win over her grandmother, and willing to defend her against her entire family. Even Luta liked him. They had deigned to speak to him, and Luta didn't like anyone. Instantly she was swamped with guilt for misleading them all, for dragging Vordan into this farce of a false mating. She sucked in a breath, controlling her respiration, squashing the incipient panic attack. She would not fall back into the darkness. She had a job to do. There was a rustle of cloth, and Vordan stood before the slight opening in the curtains. "Are you all right?" His voice was hushed in the alcove's dimness. She nodded, focusing on her breathing. "You don't sound all right. I can hear your heart racing." She glared at him, and he held his hands up in defense. "Don't look at me like that. It's not like I can turn my ears off." She didn't respond, the blood roaring in her ears as waves of panic and guilt assaulted her. "Can I get you anything?" She squeezed her eyes shut and shook her head. She just needed to ride it out, ride the wave. She felt the bed dip, and then he was next to her, lying on top of the covers, hauling her into his arms. She struggled to get away, her legs tangling in the covers when he shushed her and tucked her head under his chin, pulling the covers up to her neck. Hugging releases oxytocin, which helps reduce stress and anxiety. "Just lie here for a minute, I won't do anything, I promise." He slowly stroked his hand down her hair and her back, his palm a big warm weight on her spine. He repeated the motion again and again, and with every stroke she felt the tension slowly dissipate. By the time he finished, she was boneless with pleasure. She finally found the will to speak. "That feels amazing." She felt his amusement. "Everything I do is amazing." She disentangled her hand to give him a half-hearted whack. "Why does this help?" "I told you. Pressure helps. It releases oxytocin." They lay there in silence for a bit before he asked, "How often do you get these?" She stiffened, considering how to respond, before deciding to tell him the truth. "Not often. Not anymore. It was worse before." She snorted a laugh. "Heading a criminal cartel was a high-pressure occupation, you know. They don't release 7 tips to reduce your cartel stress articles in the intergalactic magazines." She sighed. "Thank you, but I need to get up. I'm starving." He let her go, but he could feel the reluctance. "Are you sure?" "What, you think I should just stay here wrapped up in your arms? Can't stay in bed forever?" "We could try." His voice was conversational. "I think I could give staying in bed with you forever a go." The outrageous flirtation had its desired effect, startling a laugh from her. "I need to find my pack with my things. I need a brush. Goddess knows what my hair looks like." He smiled, his teeth a flash of white in the dim light. "It looks beautiful." He reached out and tugged a spiral, laughing wolfishly when it sprung back with joyful abandon. "It looks happy. Why do you slick it back so much?" She shrugged, suddenly shy at the unexpected vulnerability. "I'm a military officer. It's protocol. And the stuff gets everywhere. It's so much work." He mock-leered at her. "So that's a no to staying in bed forever, then?" She leaned over and tapped him on his chest. "Come on, lazy, let's get up. Aren't your species meant to be hunters? Go hunt me some food." It was Vordan's turn to stretch, his claws edging out slightly as he did. She tried her best, she really did, not to look at him, not to trace the curve of his lean muscles with her eyes, but damn, he was gorgeous. Lean, defined muscles covered in smooth skin. "We are a feline genetic derivative. Haven't you spent any time around cats? Sometimes we just want to lie in a dark, comfy spot." Her eyes narrowed. "I'm more of a dog person." He surged up and caught her by the nape of her neck, bringing her nose to nose with him in an instant, and her breath caught at the power implicit in the move. "Liar!" He bared his teeth at her in a mock snarl, and Lenora rolled her eyes in response. "Fine, I'll go get food without you. Don't bitch when I bring back all vegetarian." He winced, letting her go. "That's just mean." "Yup, that's me. You're stuck with a mean old pirate queen turned military officer. Poor little flyboy, so hard done by." She grabbed her pack from where she had spotted it next to the door and sauntered into the bathroom, casting a slashing glance at him as she closed the door. He laughed aloud. "Perhaps we should get you a caffeine drink. You're prickly when you wake up." She picked up a discarded throw cushion and tossed it at him, delighted by his playfulness, amazed at his ability to have laughter dancing through her after a panic attack. Lenora stood in the bathroom examining herself. Her hair wasn't too bad. A little combing and oil and she'd be fine. The outfit, though. If her whole family were here, there would be a dinner. Her father would want to hold court. She sighed. Dressing up was the last thing she wanted. As she went through the ablutions, she accessed her HUD. Sure enough, there was a message from Ari. "El, Dutak will return tonight. She has ordered a feast of welcome at your return, and to celebrate your mating." Ari paused, and Lenora could feel her choosing her words wisely. "I expect our parent will wish to welcome your mate into the family the traditional way." Her blood ran cold as Ari continued. "I'll send you a couple of outfits that you left here in your closets. Hopefully they still fit." Lenora checked the time and realized they had less than an hour left. She had slept the day away. She opened the door. "Vordan, are you there?" "Yes, lady?" He was all seriousness, responding to the change in her tone. "Do you have any ceremonial or formal clothing with you?" He nodded. "I wasn't sure where this assignment would take us, so I packed for several contingencies." "Good. My father is throwing us a ball to celebrate our mating." He nodded, not giving any hint of his true feelings. "I'm so sorry, Vordan. I wish I'd never said it now. Dutak will want to parade us to the family. He may wish to spar with you. It is traditional for Tritorans to undertake ritual combat when a new member joins the clan in order to determine their place in the hierarchy." He nodded again. "I will be fine. I will try not to harm your father." Lenora sighed. "It won't be as easy as you think. He's fast, smart, strong and sneaky. He's headed up an intergalactic cartel his entire life." She reached out to Vordan, placing her palm on his arm. "Please be careful. It's usually just a ritual. But I've been gone so long and he was so angry, I don't know how he'll react. She cursed. I'm so sorry again. He smiled grimly and placed his hand over hers. Stop apologizing. It is done and can't be undone. Do you still think it was the only way to get us in? She nodded. Then it was necessary for the mission, and we will do whatever is necessary for the mission. She searched his gaze, determined to root out any hint of deception or anger, but both her heart and her empathic senses told her he was completely serious. How unexpected. His generosity of compassion and his commitment to duty. All right, thank you. She stepped back and looked around the room some more, spotting a package next to the front door. It appears my sister had some dresses dropped off while we slept. Vordan looked like he had been slapped. That's impossible. I would have heard them, or smelled them. Lenora laughed. Maybe not. I keep telling you not to underestimate them. Lenora grabbed the package and pulled out the options, erupting in curses when she saw what Ari had sent. What's wrong? My sister thinks she's funny. Why? Lenora sighed. She had no other options. You'll see. She seems to care for you very much, Lenora sighed. Dutak has many children spanning the decades of his life. Ari and I were the only ones close in age in the compound. We were very close growing up. Who was Ari's mother? Is she still with Dutak? Lenora looked at him strangely, then shook her head slightly. Sorry, I forgot you don't know the history. Dutak is Ari's mother. He was female when he conceived her. Ari's father is a Galatian trader. He has never been in the picture. I'm not sure that he even knows Ari is his child. Vordan looked so stunned that she patted him on the cheek. It's okay. If you aren't Tritora, it takes some getting used to. You know my Malati that you met earlier? He nodded. She prefers the female body but was Dutak's father because the partner she fell for at the time preferred the female form, so she took the male form to let them have young. There was a faint chime, signalling half an hour until they had to go. We can discuss xenobiology and alien reproduction another time. I need to get ready. She grabbed the outfits and dove back into the bathroom. She had to get this right. She had to convey just enough of the woman she was so that they empathized with her, but enough of the new that they didn't try to steamroll her as a daughter of the house. She regarded the dress. The old Elle would have worn the skimpy outfit with pride, enjoying the attention and the admiring male gazes it drew. Unor clan attire was best described as sensual, liberated, chic. The new Lenora wouldn't be caught dead in that thing, preferring practical clothing. Even when she had joined her mother on Falosia, she hadn't adopted the Falosian dress standards, which tended to the form fitting and elegant. She stilled. Why was this such a big deal to her? She'd certainly worn this and worse during her mission assignments. Because this is you, her subconscious whispered. Yes, that was it. She wasn't hiding behind an assumed identity for this mission. This was her, with her family, working for her new planet. She looked at herself in the mirror, really looked at the female she had become over the decade. Was her controlled life enough? She sighed, shaking her head. Goddess, she was as melodramatic as a Galatian soap opera. Perhaps just for tonight, she would let herself be who she wanted to be. Not what her family wanted, not worried about fitting in with Falosian society or complying with military standards. Just herself. She looked at the outfit options again, considering. Yes, that would work. She grabbed the scissors from her travel pack.